here. Y'all ready to learn? Okay, for some of us this is learning, for some of us this is just refreshing. But the book of Hebrews here, it was written to those Jews who believed on Jesus. That's thus the name Hebrews. So it was not written, it is a counterpart to the book of Romans. The book of Romans was written to non-Jews who believed. But the book of Hebrews is written to Jewish believers. And this book of Hebrews was written because they were transitioning from the law to grace. That is, they were transitioning from before Jesus came, when they were bound under the Old Testament law, to now this time after the resurrection of Jesus, when they were no longer bound by the law because Jesus came and fulfilled the law. And they were struggling, understanding how to make the transition from the law to grace. And the part of the reason why they were struggling is because they were brought up in a time when it was the law that made you righteous. But now they were no longer going to be made righteous by the law. They were under a time where their faith was in the law. Their confidence and their trust was in the law. And the law was their system of belief and doctrine. And God was transitioning them from the law to being under the dispensation of time of Jesus Christ, where now their confidence had to be in what Jesus did. And Jesus now established what they were to believe and have confidence in. Are you all with me? And so watch this. They understood who God was because of the law, but they didn't understand how to relate to God through Jesus Christ. And so one of the reasons I was taking time with this is because you have to understand the difference between the law and the dispensation or the time of grace. Because many of us are going back to the Old Testament to learn how to relate to God. But when you do that, you are in error, because we no longer relate to God out of the Old Testament. That's why it's foolish to go pull up somebody's prayer in the Old Testament because somebody wrote a book about their prayer and make it your prayer. Because their prayer was how they related to God when their belief, their doctrine was the law. You're not under the law anymore. So, Pastor, why do we have the Old Testament? Good question. We have the Old Testament because the Old Testament verifies that what's in the New Testament is the will of God, because God prophesied what was to come through Jesus Christ in the Old Covenant. We have the Old Testament because the Old Testament lays out for us how God got us from the law to Jesus Christ. We have the Old Testament because the Old Testament clearly lets us know who God is. Doesn't let us know how to get to him, just lets us know who he is. And the Old Testament clearly defines who we are, our weaknesses and our frailties and our difficulty to be who God would have us to be. And so the Old Testament is what we call a schoolmaster. It lays out for us clearly who God is, clearly who we are. It helps us to understand his ways, but it is the New Testament that teaches us how to have a relationship with God. Are you all understanding this? The Old Testament is like God's profile, but the New Testament is how to have a relationship with the person who was profiled in the Old Testament. Figure I'd bring it up to something y'all could understand. See, you can see somebody's profile, but you don't know them. But the profile just gives you a sense of who they are. The Old Testament is God's profile. It gives us an understanding of who he is. But it's the New Testament that tells us how to have a relationship with him.